We're living in a time of alertness where people are very focused on sustainability and on the environment.
Consumers are looking at packaging because it affects the environment, but it's also a health issue.
What's in the ground and what's in the environment, what's in the air. We can test for parts per trillion.
What can I do on my consumer side to help the earth as well?
So I really appreciate how you've touched on both the manufacturer side as well as the consumer side and how complex everything is. It's a consumer demand that's driving it, and all of us as people are really driving this, right? We all care about the environment. So another claim that I see out there is ethically sourced. Can you explore what's behind this one?
So this one I think is a really interesting one. It's also very much consumer driven. It's very much a heightened attention by consumers on where their food is coming from and how where it comes from has an impact on them and an impact on the environment. So you see things on labels like humanely raised, ethically sourced. But what there isn't is really a regulatory definition of what those things mean. And so you also have a lot of third-party organizations that will certify products in those categories, but there's not a lot of clarity in what criteria they use, and they don't all use the same criteria. So it's definitely an environment where there's a lot of, call it a mixed bag of things going on in marketing and in label statements, where you see the legislature, I think, really lagging behind what you're seeing in some of the marketing.
And I think part of that too is where we're seeing some influence is when we're dealing with international trade issues as well. So where I think the government can have a significant impact is where they can hold product hostage. And they can do so by saying there's a rebuttable presumption in place that this is problematic. And you guys, companies, need to explain to us that that isn't the case. So we see those kinds of issues in terms of slavery and product coming from places where there is child labor, where we have identified deadlines with respect to when these products can be assessed and pulled and seized by customs control. And it's, again, not very clear, though, how you get around that. How do you satisfy the government? So a lot of this, there's a drive for transparency from consumers. There's a want to be transparent from a lot of companies, but there isn't still a lot of regulation that provides the level of clarity needed to make everybody really speak the same language, so to speak. We're getting there.
Some of that international aspect has been fleshed out in the courts. Because, of course, there was a Supreme Court case about slavery and cocoa and actually made it less likely that companies would be held liable in the U.S. justice system for those kinds of things, but certainly consumers would hold companies accountable for it. So it's still very much a concern.
It's also interesting what the overlay is on your supply chain when you're thinking about where, if you're making an ethically sourced claim, you're obviously sourcing your ingredients or sourcing your materials from somewhere. Where is that certification coming from and what does that mean? So reliance on your suppliers, understanding where your supply chain is getting, where are they getting their sourcing from? So it really does also bring up an important understanding of what's in your supply chain, who's operating it, what tiers are you working with, how far down the chain does it go? When I say you, meaning the manufacturers or even the suppliers themselves, getting that affirmation of the claim that you want to make about the product itself.
So because we're seeing some litigation in this area and there is no definition, government-driven or legislative-driven or even court-driven at this point on what quote-unquote humanely raised is or ethically raised is, or ethical even, what we're doing in the defense of these claims is really just reminding our clients that, look, our clients want to make these claims. They believe that their supply chain is ethical, that the proteins that they're getting are from farms that are humanely treating animals. They are very committed to that. They're not making these statements without an important corporate ethos that they have. And without a definition, we've got to give them some advice and some framework so that they can continue to do that. The customer wants it, they want to do it. And the thing that we said is exactly what Steph just pointed out, and that is transparency. If you're going to say that your source, your protein was sourced from an ethical treatment or ethically raised, then just provide what that means to your company. Figure out a way that you can share with your consumers how you believe they're treated ethically. And whether you can do it on a label or not, or through your ancillary marketing, it's that transparency that the consumers want and that I think the courts will expect to see when they're challenged.
And I think the regulators are going to expect to see this as well. I mean, there's going to be certain disclosure requirements, many of which already exist in the EU, but we'll be having them here in the US as well, in terms of what that sustainability, what the social aspects, and what your governance process is actually like, so that investors know and understand and appreciate those types of issues as well, and can be confident that the company is as focused on them as they should be. So again, it's another layer of demanding transparency, and all around, at the end of the day, it is going to put more onus on companies and corporations to just make sure that they know what they're getting and where it comes from, and have a track and trace process that allows them to do that efficiently.
So, we've talked a lot about food impacting the environment. What about the environment making an impact on food? How does that come into play with this discussion?
Well, there's no question that we live in a place where our environment has been subjected to lots of different things, whether it's enhanced and developed better agricultural systems over the years, whether it's the way our industrial changes have evolved. But at the end of the day, there's still something in our soils, right? Our soils and our air contain some form of contaminants. And in the soil, wherever you go, there are certain elements, whether it's mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, they come from the ground. So the truth of the matter is, everything that we eat from the ground or on trees has some exposure to these types of elements. It is in our food, and these trace amounts of these elements in our food is a practical reality. And it's not something that companies are adding to products. It's something that is naturally occurring. And so when you talk about the consumer's demand for clean living, right, which means whole foods or foods that are plant-based, they have to factor in that that also means that they are going to be exposed to trace amounts of these elements. And you can't really sacrifice putting fruits and vegetables and grains in your diet because there are these trace amounts, because the value and the vitamins you get from those whole foods are critically important to our health. So it's a very interesting time to be in this, because there is that kind of scrutiny around what comes out of the ground and what we put into our body.
So we've talked about elements and metals. What other sort of contaminants can show up in the food supply, and what happens then?
That's an excellent question. And I think that the key issue here, and an issue that we deal with our clients all the time, is what do we want to look for in terms of contaminants, because there are some that are specified by regulations, and there are others that could develop as a result of a manufacturing process or contamination. So what is it that we should be looking for? And if we find them, what is it we're going to do? And it's really important to figure that out before you hit that crisis point, to have a set of guidelines to say, well, this level is okay, this level isn't okay. Because what the FDA is primarily looking to is whether or not there's an adulteration of a food product that could create a safety or health issue to the public, and whether or not that needs to be reported. So in developing food, whether it be plants, whether it be something that's processed, but noting that there's always going to be something in our food. There really is no avoiding it unless we go back to cell-based development of plants in a bubble. Then you're going to have to really consider what those parameters parameters look like? So sometimes if we set certain thresholds for levels and we get a test result back that says that it's actually exceeded that, we might have to engage in what we would call a recall. And a recall could take place in a limited geography. It could be a broader geography. It really depends on how the product is manufactured and processed. And this, once again, gets us back to this whole issue of traceability, because the better traceability you have, the more narrowly you're going to be able to draw that recall type issue product, and the less you're going to have to worry about. So it is all a part of the big picture, but I think the point is that now there's even more awareness that there are things in what we eat. There might be an expectation that we test for more than maybe we used to, and there needs to be a responsible action plan to the extent that something is discovered.
I think what you just said is actually really important for our clients to understand, is that proper escalation protocol, really having the right processes and procedures in place that understands not only what's in your product, but what does your testing show? And if your testing does show that maybe there are, elements in this product that you didn't expect, maybe they're not at a high enough level to cause concern, not everything is necessarily going to cause a recall. And really not jumping to conclusions, but understanding, okay, what does that level mean? Do we need expert engagement? Do we need to understand what the legislator's saying about this? Do we then need to assess, is this a class 1 recall, a class 2 recall, or is this just an issue? It's just a quality issue, right? I mean, what is it and how does that impact? Because we're talking about a lot of products sometimes in this, it can be a lot of product at issue. And maybe it's not the type of response that needs to happen necessarily to have a recall, but we do see FDA taking more and more interest in the recall space because of this heightened scrutiny around what is coming out in these products, and it's an industry trend.
And I think another important point there to be thinking about, which clearly the legislatures and the regulators are thinking about as well, is who's the target of a particular product? Is it a product that's to be sold to babies or children or the elderly or other groups of people who might be subject to more impact from that type of issue? And understanding the science of that with respect to each of the manufacturers is also really important, because you don't want to jump to a recall for a product that the average consuming adult is really not going to have an issue with. That might not necessarily be the right thing to do, and it could create a shortage of different types of materials. So again, it's important to be really thoughtful in terms of who is the product going to. And another piece of this puzzle is what is going to happen to the product after it's made. Sometimes it's a raw material that goes through another process where it's actually cooked or heated, or something happens to it that would eliminate the problem that may have initiated in the first place. So all of those different variables, I think, are very important to consider when you're thinking about what action you have to take if there's something in the food.
Yeah, and it's continuing to shift, and it's dynamic, and that really makes this a really great fit for our teams, because it really is multidisciplinary. It's cross-practice. I mean, we are working every day with our product liability lawyers, with our legislative affairs teams, to really understand what's coming down in the legislature, what's happening behind the scenes, and how can our government affairs group help, and really understanding these issues, not just from the litigation perspective or from the regulatory perspective, but from the legislative perspective, from the data privacy perspective, from these other issues that are impacting how this is all shifting. Is really, really important, and it's something that's really a benefit to our clients, that we can pitch in on all these different pieces.
It really is. It's a pivotal time in our society generally and actually globally, dealing with these issues. And to be a part of that and to be able to work and partner with our clients to think about these issues, to have some perhaps additional insight from our legislative teams or from some of our lawyers who are actually in the courthouses talking to plaintiffs' lawyers, predicting where the risks are coming from. That is what makes working with our teams truly beneficial for our clients, and I think what sets us apart in many ways from a lot of our peer firms. That partnership, the ability to work hand in hand is very exciting, and particularly in times like this of such volatile change.
I really appreciate you sharing the nuances of this very important and complex topic. There's so much to consider here, and I appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. Thank you so much.